focused mostly. So mostly focused on high risk medication management and working within medical teams and such. And, then in 2016, I was faced with my father's lymphoma diagnosis. And for the first time of any significance, was thrust onto the patient side of the medical equation, and shockingly didn't understand that side, which was, the first frustration is how is it this bad and I didn't know it. And then now I can't go back. Like I can't go back and do what I was doing when I now have seen how terrible this is, and I know I cannot make the impact I need to make from the inside. So I ended up helping him navigate his journey. He ended up passing away the following year, and I started Peace Advocacy Group with the intention of helping others in the way that I had helped him, which means really locking arms with patients in some of their most vulnerable times of crisis, and helping them get clarity, get the answers they need from both the deep medical place, but also a spiritual and otherwise place. So it's kind of tying in all of those pieces, which is thus the name Peace Advocacy Group. And to bring Fernanda in, I recently, 2 years ago, moved to the Tampa Bay area, and Fernanda was so gracious to allow me multiple opportunities to eventually meet with her and really decide she was a great fit for being sort of the feet on the ground in Gainesville, where the roots got started. And so she is a nurse, and she's been fantastic and a great partner. So I will let her take over from there.
Hi, everyone. So as I said, I've been a registered nurse for 14 years. A lot of my work was initially at the bedside and did all the things very much like Claudia, of like, we're checking the boxes, all right, charge nurse, all of these things. But in my process, I really come to see that the healthcare system in itself was still a business in the end. And so when we still had to tackle a lot of things of like making sure that the right care or some of those let's make sure that we rule out all of these things for this patient doesn't fit within that paradigm or within the insurances or in the bigger context. But in the end, it was very hard for me because we are ultimately trying to help people in general as nurses, doctors, and everything, and it didn't align. So I always felt I wasn't in the right arena. Then it came time to I heard from one of the other doctors, which is Claudia's husband. I kept hearing that Claudia was doing this work, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's where I need to be. I need to just, not have ties where it's insurance companies and this and that. And I can just be fully there to work with clients and in their best interest. And then I just kept saying, I need to meet Claudia. This needs to be the avenue. And we met. Everything ended up working perfectly as she was moving, and we were aligned as well with the same vision that we just needed to really, bring everyone to awareness that it's more than just the medical. Like, we can do so much more, right? And so that's where I came from and brought all of those years of nursing experience. I worked in the surgical realm and critically care trained. So I was able to bring that in from the nursing side into Peace Advocacy Group.
So let me ask you guys this. You guys, what is your typical client that comes to you? Like, what are they looking for? And then what would you say the services are that you provide to them?
Yeah, great question. So there are a variety of different cases, but I would say probably the most common scenario is an adult child calling us on an elderly parent. The adult child may not live in the area, so maybe they're in Chicago because that's where their business is, that's where their immediate family is, and they know that their parent, who is in Florida, like many people's parents and grandparents are retired in Florida, need some oversight and need some physical, like feet on the ground oversight, but also need medical oversight. They may be in a completely different industry. They don't have medical expertise. And so navigating their care becomes close to impossible and a huge source of burden and stress. They want to be the daughter, the son. They want to be a family member supporting their family member. They don't want to suddenly micromanage a completely broken healthcare system, and they don't know how. So it really is kind of stepping in with the medical knowledge that we have and saying, okay, here's where we've been. We typically will start and look through medical charts. So where have we been medically? both from an objective standpoint, like what do the labs say, what medications are you on, but also, you know, what are the physician's notes been saying? What are the progress notes saying? Where is the thought process of the providers who are involved in your care? And how does that align with your goals? And what are your, I mean, even just starting with what are your goals? It's not something that really they ever get asked, and they don't even really know how to answer it oftentimes because it's not top of mind. You know, what are your, I mean, you know, if you're in the ICU, you know, your goal is obviously to get out of the ICU, but if you're, you know, otherwise an outpatient, people don't really think about goals. They just want to feel their best, but they don't realize they can have that much involvement and engagement in their care to actually have intentions and goals. So that's kind of what we're working through, and ultimately getting them to a place where they've got a good medical team. They know they have us to reach out to if they want us as part of their team to either be physically at appointments. Fernanda's often at physically at appointments.
Nice.
I'm usually on speakerphone during appointments. I have clients all around the country. And so we are actively involved with the medical team, not in place of the patient, but as an additional set of eyes and ears. And we know our patients from a really deep place. Like we know them, we know their families, we know their situations. We know when something is said by a physician that may be triggering. And so we can help them navigate appointments in a way that they aren't usually able to do alone.
So
I
let's,
think
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say a unique aspect too is that we're also able to see, based on the goals of being able to really incorporate, well, if it is to feel good, what is that? And how do we start adding that? And then how do we optimize everything of like, maybe we need a bigger, more support system. Maybe we need to incorporate all these other factors that we've kind of let fall. So besides just like helping during the crisis, it's really creating a life that is going to be much more aligned with what you're trying to feel or experience.
So if you guys had like a client who came to you, you know, and they're saying, I mean, you know, I have Parkinson's diagnosis, or I've been diagnosed with dementia, or I don't know what's wrong with me. They're saying it's this, that, or the other thing. And, you know, I've been to all the specialists and no one can seem to figure out how to make me feel better, or how, you know, my memory keeps getting worse, and, you know, whatever it is. What are some of the feedback items that you guys might suggest? Like, what kinds of things might you recommend? Like, I can tell you, just in doing the life care planning model, which does sound similar in many ways, like a lot of times clients feel really stuck with whatever their insurance provides or with what Medicare provides. So like they run out of the PT appointments on Medicare dollars, and they're like, well, I can't go to PT anymore because I don't. And I'm like, are you benefiting from PT? Like, is the speech therapy helping you with your Parkinson's? Oh, yes, it definitely is. You know, well, we can go and ask for more Medicare dollars, or we can go and maybe do private pay, you know, like if they can afford it. It's like this disconnect between thinking that they could actually, you know, effectively use their own resources to provide some of those things that they think they can't get because it's not covered by insurance or covered by Medicare. I'm just wondering, are those the kinds of things that you guys are doing as well? Or are there other things that you guys are kind of addressing with patients that maybe they're not even thinking about?
All the things. Go ahead, Fernanda.
Well, so to begin with, what you were saying about the dementia or Parkinson's diagnosis, we try to look at it holistically. So there are a lot of factors. Even sometimes we might find like some cognitive, let's say we're starting to show some forgetfulness or things like that. That doesn't necessarily automatically put you to dementia. It can be, so depression can lead that, like that, foods, like being inside, your circadian rhythm, like all of these other things can be factors. So we don't need to, like, unless the doctors have already been like, hey, this is what you have and this is where we're progressing, we can, and even if it's that, we can like just augment all these other therapies. And then what you were saying with insurance, I love to incorporate at the beginning, especially when it's new to patients, of being like, hey, let's get to PT, let's get stronger. Sometimes we're able to also switch what they're being treated with in physical therapy. So let's say the first X amount of therapy sessions are for balance, then maybe we can change the diagnosis to be like strength of XYZ, whatever that might be, right? To build muscle mass or whatever. Or let's switch it to occupational therapy. There's ways to kind of work within that, as you said, to request, but I'm also a big, like, if it is helping you, then let's see if there are resources where we can continue this private pay, because it's an investment in yourself, in your quality of life. And when we think of the bigger picture, if you not having those therapies are going to make you end up in a skilled nursing facility or an ALF or something like that, I would prefer to invest it in myself and then be at home and comfortable. And there's so many, you know, the gym memberships locally here, they're incorporating seniors and like making things a little bit easier for them to like have the weights are already set up. There's someone to guide. And so there's multiple options, and we do incorporate a lot of everything and anything, right? We're not just stuck in one medical, like one model either. So we'll bring in acupuncture, we'll bring in all these kinds of things to just create, you know, some things work for some people and not for others. And this is very customized, you know, approach, just like we are as people, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, you know, even just thinking about a recent call I had, you know, an elderly gentleman who's starting to show some signs of cognitive decline. And when we really dig deeper in, like, let's back up, like, you know, decades ago, when did the rheumatoid arthritis start? And so you'll start to see that we had inflammatory processes going on years ago, and nobody's really putting the pieces together that, like, okay, you know, 15 years ago, we started with rheumatoid arthritis, then we had COVID and long COVID. And so we've just had this cascade of inflammation, and each individual specialist is tackling their piece, but not putting all the pieces together. And so it's really having conversations with people of, you know, here's what the trajectory looks like and how this may have led to inflammation, which may have led to, you know, a decrease in blood flow to the brain, and may have led to where we're at now. May have, you know, we're certainly not diagnosticians and we stay in our lane, but having the conversations of, you know, do you want to explore, not in place of your specialist, but do you want to explore other avenues that look at more root causes? Like, do you want to explore functional medicine that will actually tie all these pieces together and evaluate inflammatory processes and evaluate, you know, was there any mold exposure? Was there, what kind of toxins, what might we need to detoxify from? And so do we want to augment your therapy? Certainly always up to them, but we start to bring in some curiosity of, you know, maybe we haven't turned every stone over, and maybe we could, if you would like, and we can help that process along.
That sounds great. So typically the clients are coming to you, they're pretty open to these suggestions, or they wouldn't be right? They probably wouldn't be retaining you. And you guys are coming back with things. Here's a question I have for you. So let's say the diagnosis is terminal. Like, we have a situation. I mean, obviously, someone who has Parkinson's, that's not a terminal diagnosis, but it's the other things that kind of happen as a result of that Parkinson's diagnosis where we start to see that decline and eventual death, like from pneumonia or from other things. But so when you have a terminal diagnosis or something that's chronic, that's eventually going to lead to death, is that, like, how do you guys manage that? I know, like, I can tell you my experience with that is that we have this, like, kind of overlap of fear. And sometimes, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Atul Gawande, but he wrote this book called Being Mortal, with this idea of making sure that the end of our lives are fun, like having good quality of life versus quantity of life, you know? And I'm assuming that that probably is a strategy that you guys are using as well, by looking at, like, quality of life issues as opposed to, can you live to be 100? Yeah. And so what kinds of things, like, what do people, I'm just curious, what are people wanting? Like, when you guys have them come in, are they saying, look, my life is full when I can walk my dog, or when I don't care if I'm in a bed and incontinent, as long as I can continue to see my family members. It doesn't matter to me if I have aphasia or I can talk, as long as when they come to see me, I can make eye contact with them and I still know them and they know me. You know, is that the kind of stuff that you guys are digging into?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I definitely have clients who have been told by members of the medical system that, this is it, your heart can't recover. You had this heart attack, and there's no way that we're going to get past, this limited amount of life that you're living. And we have seen, and this is documented in the medical literature. This isn't just, anecdotal examples from us, but we know the power of mind over medicine, like, strengthening what are your reasons for, I mean, this is like ties into radical remission, right? What are your reasons for living? Are they strong enough to keep you going, to see how far your body can actually go? The resilience of the body is amazing. And we see this as kids, right? Like, we get cuts and they just go away, and we take it for granted that, like, our body's just going to heal itself. And then suddenly over time we start to question, like, my body hates me, my body's breaking down. And we totally switch our mindset around on how amazingly resilient our bodies are. And so so a lot of the work that we do is really talking our patients and clients through that. Like, let's really dive deep into what parts of your life do you love? What would you like to get back to? And so we definitely have people who have been through a lot medically, a lot of complicated surgeries, medications, have been told by many members of the medical community that, probably going to be mostly homebound or limited ability to travel. And they haven't followed that advice. Not that they've gone against medical advice, but they have said, like, I'm going to do to what what I'm able to do to my tolerance level. And that continues to, the boundary gets pushed and the boundary gets pushed. And now they're on cruises, and now they're traveling to India, and now they're, for Ayurvedic medicine, and they're doing things that medical team is like, I don't even know if that's safe, but if you're going to do it, and they do it amazingly. So yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like part of the disconnect there is the medical community is like, they're overwhelmed, right? And I know, Claudia, you've talked about this on LinkedIn about how overwhelming it is to be a medical doctor these days. I mean, it's hard. And what they have time for is reading studies, like, I've heard doctors tell people who I have in my yoga classes that yoga is bad for you. You can't do yoga, and they don't even know what yoga is. So, I mean, or breath work, or, cold plunging. And it's like, it's almost like there's some things at the medical community, we expect them to know everything about everything. We expect them to know about alternative options. We expect them to know about, really all the aspects of being a living human, but they really only have limited time and limited experience in those things themselves. And yet we look to them to guide us. And sometimes their knowledge base is limited to medical solutions. So I'm just loving this idea of kind of expanding that. And how receptive is the medical community to you guys when you kind of come in and are on the phone during an appointment? How does that go?
You want to take that, Fernanda?
Okay. So it's honestly, we never come in as we are coming as against them or anything. It's always as a representative of the patient, and also bringing in, because we tend to get tunnel visioned in whatever specialty we're in. So it's like, here is a fresh set of eyes. So I've had really good response overall from providers of, like, saying, oh, they feel patients are coming more seriously when they have us. So number one, I have had very positive reception of them thinking, oh, this person's coming to, like, for business, right? Like, this is a serious patient who's really trying to get better. I've on the patient side of things, I've heard lots of, like, I feel more respected, I feel more heard, they're taking me more serious, things like that. Very, very few people have taken it kind of like, who is this person coming? And I have to say, it's funny, I've received that more on the nursing side of things when I've gone to be, like, in the ICU to support a patient. It's like the nurse says, well, who is this nurse coming in here to act in this role? But it's been very, very rare. And then how we pose everything is that we're part of the team looking out. Everyone's goal is the patient's well-being. And so from that stance, it's hard to ever say like, you know, they're coming in a bad way, right? Because we're coming for the patient and their well-being. And if it's something like acupuncture is not going to hurt you and it's only going to help, and maybe being off the opiates is the better benefit, you know, things like that. When we can actually verbalize, hey, like, could we try this, you know? And they tend to be receptive.
Yeah, I would echo that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the future. You know, I think this is the future, because I think what we're finding in just the same old thing is that patients are not getting great care, and we are like so specialized, and it's like we don't have this multidisciplinary approach. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Fixel Institute. Where they do this multidisciplinary, you know, kind of approach. And we had Dr. Oken on a little while back, and he was talking about the importance of the speech pathologist and the social worker and the, you know, the PT and the OT and everybody kind of coming together to see where we're doing better, where we may need more focus. Like, it's just that multidisciplinary approach, thinking outside the box of just what pills can we prescribe, or procedures can we undertake, that this is really becoming how we do patient care. And it is hard, but I mean, you guys can't know everything either. Right? So I'm sure that also is like, it's like an open, you know, ended option of things that are coming on your radars for figuring out, how do we, you know, what does the future look like? I know for us, a lot of it is smart technology based, and some of the studies that we're seeing recently about, you know, hormone replacement therapy is one that is really hot topic right now. And we know that like the #1 cause of nursing home admissions is incontinence. And so if we have vaginal estrogen available to older women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that can help prevent incontinence, then we've literally been able to help people stay home longer. And so like, it's just things like that like there is this kind of ivory tower in the medical community, where it's hard to get past. And it's just so interesting that you guys are having kind of this futuristic view of how to really do proper patient care. What am I missing? I mean, what else are you guys doing that, you know, I'm just trying to understand really well, you know, what we can all do better. You know, what can we do better for being
going
patient?
off, just talking to the point that where you brought the Fixel Institute into and how they're bringing that multidisciplinary approach in the foundations, I feel like it's like pillars of health, right? Like, we all need food, we all need water, we all need exercise, we need good social connections with people around us. And so like those things, right? Physical therapy, it's helping, making people move and do all of these things. So in the foundations, these are like core things that we as human beings need to really be enriched, right? So we need to move our bodies. We need to continue to learn and have fun and do these things that make us like just naturally boost our emotions. We need to sleep well. All of these like just foundations that I think with time they've just kind of been bypassed, and it's so easier to like, hey, here's a medication to fix it. And even going into like what you mentioned about incontinence and things like that, there's, you know, just like actual like Kegel exercises that PT does, or bladder training, and things that we've just moved in so far from, of like addressing that, hey, these are like, as a human, we have just tons of needs. And if we start working on the foundations, then we just start living better lives. So in that, it's just mirrored, like what Fixel is doing is still addressing these core like pillars that with time we forget, right? As we age and we're like, okay, now we're an adult and we're perfect in how we are, and we don't know, but we need to continue going, right? We need to keep our bodies moving. And then I think, Claudia, if you wanted to talk into what she said, what else we're working on.
Well, yeah. And what came to mind when, you know, talking about interdisciplinary teams, I think they're amazing. And I worked in many of them. And I think what's still missing is we think about all of these experts around a table talking about the patient. separate from the patient. Like, let's talk and then let's go into the room and tell the patient, when really what I have found in working deeply with patients for the last 7 years is, if I say to them, why do you think this symptom has arisen? Why do you think XYZ is going on? They often, almost always, if they're given the opportunity to answer, have some really good insight as to why. And often it's not what the medical team thinks. And they're afraid to say it because they have not been given the permission to be the expert on themselves. And so there is an untapped resource in the patient that we are trying to help. And instead of us having these like amazing, you know, didactic, academic, like, let me tell you all the things I just learned from this study that I just read, there's a place for that. I think what we're still missing is our patients know a whole lot about themselves, and they really need to be given permission until they can, you know, we're helping them find their voice, but until they feel like they can speak up and say, you know what, I actually have a really great insight into what's happening, and here it is. And it's often like, you know, like maybe they voiced that, hey, this is going on and I think it's tied to this medication, but, you know, sorry, that's not in the list of side effects of that medication. So it literally can't be. That's what they're being told. It cannot be that medication. I say to them, if this timeline on paper fits what you're telling me, I don't care what was said. You know, there's no way that, you know, drug manufacturers are going to have an exhaustive list of every symptom every patient ever had. They do post-marketing surveillance, and, you know, we've got all these things, but if they're telling me 100%, I know it's from this medication, I 100% believe them. And that is not true of the vast majority of the medical profession. And that's unfortunate. I don't think anybody has malintent. Let me just be really upfront with that. Obviously my husband's a physician. I know the depth of compassion. You don't like get through medical school just because you thought it would be fun. Like, there's nothing fun about medical school. So, you know, you're talking about people who have just been trained a certain way, and we have to, like, we're like reincorporating humanism into this, and also the physicians have to be also get granted permission from their superiors, you know, because they don't have the time, they aren't given the time they need, they aren't given the luxury of saying, oh, I just spent 15 minutes, you know, asking my patient to tap into her intuition. I mean, that's not standard of care, right? So it, you know, we're filling in those types of gaps and hoping that eventually those gaps will become less of a gap and more of a you know, standard.
When you guys are thinking about some of the success stories that you're seeing of people doing better after your intervention, like, what are the kinds of alternative modalities that are, you know, being successfully employed? Like, what are people doing, you know, outside the traditional model that does seem to, you know, bring the remission or bring better quality of life that's consistent with your patient's goals?
You want to take that, Fernanda? And then I'll.
Yeah. So one comes to mind. So he actually had his heart stopped. There's like necessarily not the traditional, but it's called pulseless electrical activity. And so he was hospitalized and essentially intubated for a very long time in the ICU and things like that. He eventually overcame all of that, and then with time, I remember specifically when I joined, the physician had eventually said, okay, you're on your medications. Like, this is kind of like alluding to, this is what life is going to be like. So then we started, and I was like, okay, well, you're still moving great. Like, we can add like new things to your regimen. And they didn't fit in with the insurance model for some of the things. So for example, I recommended cardiac rehab for him. And in that, because he didn't have the traditional diagnosis of heart attack, and so insurance wasn't going to cover it. But, you know, I really felt like if he got out of the home and went socialize with people and was on monitored, you know, exercise regimen, that he would start to see improvements. So he started doing that. Then with time, he's like, this feels great. And I was like, okay, let's incorporate physical therapy and for balance, right? Because as we age, our balance just tends to decline with time, and it was going to be beneficial anyway. And he's already having good results with exercise from cardiac rehab. So he went from once a week to then incorporating 2 days of physical therapy. So now going from no exercise He was now doing 3 days a week. And then he enjoyed that a lot and started doing the gym in his where he was living. So then he was exercising 5 days a week. Before we knew it, then we started optimizing medications and talking to the doctors and being like, hey, these are some older meds. Can we add, XYZ? What are your thoughts? And then from there, his heart function went from 35, so that's low and considered heart failure at that point, to being able to go to 50 to 55%, which is normal and excellent, right? So he had that big jump, and then he's going on a cruise for 30 days. So he went from being in the hospital pretty frequently and not have, a very, limited in this very close silo, to now being out in the community, interacting with people,
Wow.
now to having the confidence to go on a cruise for this long. And so that just shows, like, when we're putting in like those pillars that I mentioned earlier, then we can actually see the person start to flourish, right? And even at 80 years old, we can still improve little by little,
Yeah. And, it kind of brings up this other, topic that we talk about a lot, which is, this idea of, as people age, we kind of stop moving. We're not as good with nutrition. We tend to have interrupted sleep and don't prioritize sleep because we wake up in the middle of the night, and it really just becomes almost like a warehousing. And what we see in our practice is there's kind of this acceptance from seniors of, like, I'm invisible, I'm just here to die. And it's so heartbreaking. But the reality is that we know brains, even in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, can create new neural pathways. And we have the ability now to really use things like hormones, or using strategies like interoception and mindfulness and meditation to connect with your breath and connect with your heart. And we know that these things actually improve the brain. And so, I love that you guys are kind of looking at these issues and taking these things on. From the brain health side, Claudia, how do you deal with the brain health stuff? And is that something that you guys are taking on as well, aside from like just the medical stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely evaluate the whole person and what the needs are. We actually recently toured, several months ago, Aviv clinics. There are places that are doing amazing things from the brain health standpoint. Hyperbaric oxygen, like full programs where people are recovering from strokes, like you could never imagine, would have been a complete anomaly and unbelievable to the medical system. And so there are, of course, again, we're talking like not everybody can access that because of the cost of those types of services. So based on what the patient wants and is financially feasible, we've definitely brought in Sierra, who you're going to have in a couple months, with regard to the boats method. So we will bring in the resources who are experts in that field, but experts who work in a holistic way, kind of like us, like that will bring in all of the elements that the patient needs, rather than somebody who might work in a very siloed way. So we're really trying to help our patients think outside the box and utilize practitioners who also think outside the box. And ultimately, I think this boils down to, one of the downfalls of our medical system, which is, terms like baseline, like we're trying to get patients back to baseline, and baseline is, they come in and they're at this level of functioning, maybe they drop a little bit, and we're trying to get them back to baseline. There's never rarely a conversation to improve. Like I'm coming, it's a rare physician appointment where you're saying, like, actually, I have no problems now. I would just like to optimize my health. But those are actually the conversations I have with my own functional medicine doc. Like when I come into the appointment, I'm like, actually, I have nothing wrong with me. I am here for you to tell me how I could optimize where I'm at right now. And she's like, these are my favorite appointments, because most people don't come into appointments like this. And that's actually what a lot of physicians and other practitioners want, but it is not modeled for us. I mean, that's not what we do. And so we don't even know we can do that. We don't know if insurance is going to pay for that. We haven't been taught that investing in our health is a good investment. We'll invest in lots of other things, but like you said already, what we've been taught is if insurance doesn't cover it, I can't have it. So that's the end of that conversation. And insurance doesn't cover the optimization conversation. So I guess I can't have that. So it really is a mindset shift of, let's look at your health and healthcare in a completely different light. You know, like you don't have to just go to the doctor when something terrible has happened. Like we can actually start the conversations of optimization, and your current baseline doesn't have to be the standard. Like we can elevate that, you know, that doesn't have to be where we're trying to get to. That's a low bar. So let's raise the bar. Yeah.
I love it.
And for brain health, it's beautiful. I love having the conversations with our seniors and being like, hey, you can learn something new, and that like something hard too, right? Like we can still learn to do it. Like I had one, I always wanted to play the piano, and I'm like, why are we not doing that? Like you have the time now, you didn't have it before, but now you do, and you have the resources, and like, why not, you know? And then that brings that passion and joy back in our lives, and like taps into that side of our that we so longed to fulfill when we were younger and didn't. So it's just beautiful. Like there's so much out there.
I know. And you know, once they start playing the piano, like what you find is that may lead to other brain neural pathway openings, right? Because then you
the
like
socialization,
like whoosh, and now all of a sudden like they can, you know, do this with their fingers that they couldn't do before. And it's great. It's really amazing. Well, okay, Claudia, I want you to tell us about your new book. I know I just tried to order it on Amazon and it said, yeah, you're on the list, but you won't get it till February.
No, I know. It's such a teaser. That was not that I had no role in that. I was told to pick a date starting at the beginning of next year. I intentionally picked World Cancer Day, which is February 4 of 2025, because that is, of course, significant in the story of my dad's journey and ultimately why I chose to do this work. But yeah, I did just get a physical copy, the first physical copy last week. So not to be a teaser, but I can't, this is literally the only one in existence at this moment. But the intention was, after all of these years of having these deep conversations with individual patients, how can I get the information out there to people on a larger scale in a very accessible and, you know, cost-friendly form of, we can think about all of this differently. You know, I don't think we need any more I don't think we need any more people telling us what to do and what to say. I think what we need is somebody to inspire us to think differently. And so that's the goal of the book, is how can we think differently about what's been modeled for us, about why and how we go to doctors, what types of doctors we go to, how we utilize the Western medical system and augment with potential Eastern modalities. Like, let's just think about all of this differently and start to ask the questions of what if. And so there's guided meditations in there. It's like very much not your typical healthcare book. I've kind of gone rogue. I probably am now off the walls of the pharmacy school. I don't really know. But I'm owning the going rogue. And so that's what the book's about.
Yeah, but I think there's the future in this. You know, you may be one of those, you know, breakthrough pioneers to kind of thinking about the healthcare strategy a little bit differently. And I love what you said. I actually got chills when you were talking about, you know, one of the biggest resources being the patient themselves for figuring out what the issue is. It just really is where we should be starting, you know, when we're trying to figure it out, like not just taking a history, but actually asking, what do you think it is?
Right.
I just love that. I love it. I was listening to this recent podcast with Dr. Mary Claire Haver, and she was talking with Andrew Huberman. It's like this big thing on hormone replacement therapy. And they were just walking through all the studies and how flawed some of the studies were. Like they did this menopause study, and anybody who had hot flashes was kicked out of the study. And I'm like, what? So they were eliminated from the study group, which completely destroyed the study group, right? So anyway, I mean, it's just so interesting if we start thinking about, you know, how can we do better? How can we individualize as opposed to just kind of looking at each person and trying to fit them into a particular box? If we can get down to what is this individual's needs, and then using some different modalities like you guys are talking about. I love it. And this idea of radical remission, before we started this webinar, for those of you still listening, we were talking a little bit about our own experiences with radical remission, and that it really is happening out there. So it is something, and I know that you are a radical remission coach, Claudia, and thank you for doing that. I know there's 10 things you're supposed to look at when you're deciding whether or not you want to try and employ that strategy. And if you guys are interested, I definitely encourage you to look that up. But it does promote a natural healing process, which is a little different. And some people are going to be like, whoa, but there is radical remission going on out there. It's rare, but it is happening. All right. And I know we're out of time, but I think we did have a couple minutes left. If anybody has questions, I'm looking at the question and answer chat, and there aren't any right now. But if you guys want to quickly put in some last minute questions for anybody who might have them out there, we're happy to take those. But I really appreciate you guys coming on to talk to us about, these issues, because that patient advocacy is healthcare advocacy. It's really, really important to advocate for yourself. And I think one of the myths that you guys obviously have kind of blown up during this webinar is this idea that if you ask questions, if you say, yeah, I'm 30 minutes past getting my medication or my pain medication or whatever, that there would be a repercussion from asserting yourself, and you end up getting less care as opposed to appropriate care. I think you guys have already said, you kind of walk in and the doctors, the medical community says, we're going to take you seriously because you care about your health. And so in many respects, it does give us a little bit more attention when we have an advocate and when we start to really ask for things that we need. I don't know if you guys have any feedback on that issue.
Sorry, I got wrapped into the Q&A. Somebody asked the name of the book, and it's Patient Empower Thyself. I'm clearly not very good at selling myself. Patient Empower Thyself. Rolanda says, thank you. Jane says, do your clients get criticized for not following medical advice?
Yeah.
I think that it depends on the practitioner and the provider, but there is a level of frustration from physicians that if I've got a diabetic patient and I'm telling you, these events are going to happen if you don't get your blood sugar down, and here's how to do it. Let me see you in 3 months. And in 3 months, there hasn't been a change. There is a level of frustration. The amount of criticism that gets verbalized is really dependent on the physician and their personality type, but the frustration, whether it's internal or externally verbalized, is there. And this is why, the future of medicine really needs to incorporate a lot of different modalities, one of which is a health coach who can help people actually work on habits and changes to lifestyle that are largely different from what they've been doing. A single 15-minute visit is clearly, we all struggle with changing our lifestyle. And so to ask somebody who has historically eaten a certain way, I'll see you in 3 months, completely shift that, is of course unreasonable and sets up everybody for failure or for criticism. But the amount of actual verbalized criticism, it just would be just dependent on it certainly exists, but not as much when we're present. Not as much when we're present.
Yeah. Did we get another question? Makes complete sense. Okay, great. All right. Well, you guys, like I said, it has been such a pleasure to have you on. I hope you'll come back and continue to update us on things that are happening that you guys are seeing. I'm excited for the launch of this book. I think it's time for us to start really taking the power back. And sure appreciate everyone tuning in. And I'm Shannon Miller, Miller Elder Law Firm. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.